and speak directly into the microphone and switch off after speaking. Reporting officers using Teams, please switch cameras and microphones on when speaking and off when finished. Use the hands up icon in Teams to indicate questions and comments. The meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public, and a recording of the meeting will be available on the Council's website within 24 hours of the meeting. Please put mobile phones on silent or turn off. That's great. And on to the agenda. Have we got any apologies for absence?
None, Chair.
Correct. Right, the minutes. Are there any comments on the minutes? David, friends.
Yeah, thanks. Just there's an error on the published minute, but I believe the one you're going to be asked to sign is corrected in the sense that you unfortunately were not elected chair of Scrutiny Finance Review Group, of the Task and Finish Group. But I understand the copy you've got to sign has actually been corrected.
I'll double check. Well, it's on the first page. Oh yeah, no, that's been changed. Okay, perfect. So is everyone happy for me to sign off the minutes? Yes, correct. Have we got any disclosures of interest?
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Perfect. And there is no urgent business. Any references from committees? No.
None, Chair.
Perfect. So we're on to the waste materials report. So I'll pass it over to Sean.
Thank you, Chair. Before you've got the report requested to look at the routes and markets for the household waste collected in the town, what we've done is pulled, well, primarily Steve, has pulled all the bits and pieces and other questions are raised about the residual, the incineration, the recycling, composting, giving you a bit of text about the current routes of collection and disposal. And then in the appendices, we put all the destinations. Now they're taken from documents we submit to government. So they're the first and secondary destination and what the product's actually made into. We've also put in a quick update or two-side update on the UK Environment Act. We've circulated a longer extract that DEFRA issued late last week on the Environment Act, the principles, the changes not only for waste, but for biodiversity, for water, so that members of the Task and Finish group have got a bit of background. And rather than go through it sort of line by line, what we thought is perhaps the easiest if there's any questions you want to ask about specific issues, or we can go through it, you know, by paragraph, whichever the group wants.
Would anyone like to ask a question? Councillor Franks.
Thanks. I mean, yes, I've read it. I guess everybody has. I'm perfectly content to take it as it is and ask some questions, if you don't mind. I've got questions both general and specific. In relation to, well, I think first, thank you. It's a very informative report. So thank you both, all three of you, for that. I'm just interested in understanding some of the terms of the contract with the contractor. And to what extent are the final destinations and the treatments specified in the contract, or does the contract have a sort of general principles that the contractor needs to follow, or is it just entirely open to them to do what the hell they like?
if I could answer that, Chair, the contract doesn't specify the destinations other than for the green waste, which had a mileage requirement. So it had to be within 5 miles of Kingsway. For the particular materials, for if you look at the recycling, the destinations are set by the general principles of not only the Environment Act, but various legislation prior to that. They can only go to authorised and approved by the Environment Agency factories, reprocessors. So there's no body on the list that we send to who isn't an authorised processor. And as far as the residual waste, again, they go to approved sites, but the contract, which we renegotiated in 2015 and 2016, increased and put in the contract the amount of waste we want to divert it from landfill. So from an arbitrary amount to 49,000 tonnes of the household black bag waste. So that's a contracted and agreed diversion away from landfill. Other than that, we get a regular update, and the checks we do for waste, our submission to waste data flow, all have to be accredited reprocessors.
Thank you. Do you want me to carry on with the rest of my questions? Thank you. Yeah, paragraph 16 is telling us that the energy from waste incineration reduces, I presume we're talking about the weight of the refuse, to something like 22%. It doesn't say anything about the emissions, well, gas, carbon, methane, whatever. Nothing at all.
If the group wants, we can get the quarterly reports for the various energy from waste plants we use. We put in the all parliamentary group on air pollution report, December 2021, just to give members an update on what the general and national picture is. But if we can get the reports for any of the incinerators we use, most are publicly available documents, sort of 3-month lag in, they're online. They're fairly technical, but we can get some extracts and do a sort of FAQ for you if that's what you would like, and send you the links for all of the plants that we use.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think we're going to need quite a lot more information about incineration before we're finished with this group. Can I move on to the grids? Page 12 of my document here. Looking at the headings, 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth along domestic waste out to Bletchley, it simply says that Bletchley is the final destination and there is no output. What does that mean? Is that because it goes into landfill?
The FCC was a landfill site, so it goes directly to landfill, so therefore there's no final destination there.
The landfill site will have extract the methane, and they usually put it into gas engines to generate electricity. So I suspect, is that what you're sort of asking for?
So it is landfill.
Yeah.
It's interesting that around the Wigmore area there are vents, is that the right word? I'm not sure, that are taking methane from the old Luton Council landfill tip in the middle of Wigmore Valley Park. I recall that at the time that they were introduced, it was investigated whether there was in fact enough methane there to make it commercially viable for for sale, and in fact it wasn't, but it was nevertheless necessary for it to be released because under concentration it could be quite dangerous. Are you expecting that to continue?
If you're talking about the Bletchley site, that's an active site. So once that's capped and closed off, there'll be approximately 50 years of monitoring until it's at background levels. So that's supervised and sort of reviewed by the Environment Agency. So that's standard. For Wigmore, it'll be passive venting. So that's why you'll see the tops, and that'll continue on for a significant period again till the Environment Agency are happy that it's safe and inert, so there's no more generation of methane.
David,
Go ahead.
thank you. This releasing the methane has sort of rang an alarm bell in my mind. Methane is heavier than air. So if you release it, it doesn't sort of blow away too easily. It tends to stick to the ground. And if there's low barometric pressure, it tends to suck it out even quicker. And all you need is a spark, a cigarette end, and you could have a flash bang. You know, it's lethal stuff. The calorific value of methane is far higher than what you get out of your taps at home.
Certainly for the Bletchley site, which is in Buckinghamshire, as I say, that's an active site. So there's an active extraction. For closed and older landfill sites, the methane gets diluted. So effectively, the Environment Agency don't consider them as a risk, just because of the concentrations. Now, if there's concerns about an old site, the Environment Agency regularly check and they'll regularly produce reports, which are all public reports.
I thought David was talking about Wigmore Park venting methane. Is it coming out of the ground of in Wigmore Park and just being vented to the atmosphere?
I would have to check because that's a very old landfill site from the 50s. So I'd have to check with the landowner if that's not us and the Environment Agency. But I can do check and come back to you.
I'd be interested to know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was actually operating as a landfill site, certainly well into the 1960s, late 1960s. I couldn't give you a date, but where do we go next? Yeah, moving further along, the stuff is, you're saying what happens, the metals are extracted for recycling. What happens to the plastics? Are there any heavy metals involved, like mercury or anything else that we should be interested in?
The smaller electrical items, they're all governed by the waste electronics equipment regulations. So the processes there extract what is considered hazardous or toxic, or break it down to the separate constituents. So if there's a refrigerant, the gas is taken off and that's bulked up and either reused or disposed of. Certainly if there's any metals, they usually have a value. So there's an extraction process for that. The smaller amounts of any mercury are collected, then they're either disposed of or resold on, because mercury can be a valuable project if you've got it in bulk. And the key thing about this is it's minute quantities from each individual item. So,
yep, understand that. Thank you. So moving onto the next page. And oh no, sorry, I've got another one. The street sweepings. should we assume that street sweepings includes the stuff that's collected out of litter bins?
No, it's purely the material that's collected from the road sweepers, from the curbside. So there's a small fleet of road sweepers in the town. So it's from the highway gutters and the like, and that's where it's deposited at Kingsway and then sent off for further processing. Because there's quite a lot of organics in the street sweepings and quite a lot of grit. Once you separate those two, you've got two valuable products which are reused.
Okay, so then the litter bin stuff presumably goes in with the residual waste?
Currently, yes, usually because quite a lot of it is a bottle's half full as half-eaten food. So it's quite a messy material. It's food waste cartons, all sorts, chewing gum, all mixed in together.
Yeah, if you live like I do, fairly close to the sixth form college, you'll find the litter bins have got quite a lot of other stuff in, apart from the cardboard and plastic bottles. Empty vodka bottles, for example, are quite common. Okay, under plastic bottles then on page 13, it says forwarded for plastics recycling. Do we know who recycles them and what the recycled material is used for? Is it all done in the UK? Is any of this likely to be exported?
The plastic bottles are flaked, and they're graded and sold as a flaked separate product. So depending on colour and the different types, and they'll go to whichever reprocessor. So quite a lot of them are in Benelux countries, but it's sold as a product. There are a few companies in the UK, but invariably they end up going back into sort of the Coca-Cola plastic bottle market, because they're the biggest user and requirer of recycled product.
Okay, thank you. Mixed glass. Now this is interesting because I am familiar with the theory that glass recycling is a massive con promoted by the Glass Manufacturers Federation and the soft drinks manufacturers, on the basis that the glass manufacturers want to make sure their members continue to make lots and lots and lots and lots of new glass containers. And the soft drinks manufacturers, going back to when this was introduced, most soft drinks were sold in glass bottles. They're not now. The soft drinks manufacturers were desperate to get rid of the enormous cost of collecting and sterilising their used bottles. At the time, it was claimed that the cost of making new glass from the waste material was the energy usage, was significantly higher than the energy usage for making new glass from raw material, which of course is sand, and there's no shortage of that. Do we have any information on that?
The mixed glass includes bottles as well as jars. So, and as the council says, that one of the big costs is cleaning and then resmelting. It used to be we would separate, and FCC would separate clear glass from sort of bottles of wine. That's no longer viable, so it's all mixed, including glass jars. To the general viability and cost of producing a glass bottle, we would have to do some research into that. Because it's not a high value product, but tonnage wise, with a couple of thousand tons. If that were in your residual bin, it would cost us a lot of money to send that away for disposal. So it's a fairly effective collection method for not only recycling, but it stops people putting it in their residual bin.
Okay, I mean, in the end, the options here are not really ones that are available to us, are they? If we were to decide, for example, that rather than recycling bottles and jars, the manufacturers should charge a returnable deposit on them and then sterilise and reuse them, that's well beyond our pay grade. But it might be interesting to find out whether there are any economic and environment arguments.
Just feeding on from that, part of the Environment Bill looks at the potential to do a deposit return scheme. So initially, it would start with bottles going back into the market where they were purchased from, but then obviously potential to expand that to inclusive glass. So it may be something that not Luton Council will be doing, but as a wider government, UK government, it's something we would be looking to introduce in the not too distant future.
Thank you. Where are we going next? Batteries. Household batteries and auto batteries, we end up with a phrase that says plastics are sent for final disposal. What does that mean, please?
Is that contained in the sheet, or is that in the text? Just to check where you've...
No, it's on page 13.
Oh, right.
It's the, you've got two headings.
Oh, right.
Auto batteries and household batteries. And in both cases, they end up being sent for final disposal. I'm just wondering what final disposal means, where they're sent, who's disposing of them, what are they doing with them?
That's the plastic coverings that you get on a typical household battery. So when the machinery strips it down, that's not a product that they seek to recover. They want the metals, so it's just the plastic cover, the hard plastic, and hard plastic is quite difficult to reuse. So there won't be any real weight or volume. So there will be a limited market, bearing in mind the process it's coming through, which is focused on stripping out the metals from the battery so that they can be reused. So it'll be a really small amount in comparison to the weight of the battery. So it's just that outer covering.
Yeah, so I presume that means they're going to end up in landfill somewhere because there's no money in it.
Quite possibly, or EFW fed into that commercial EFW market on a small amount, because there literally will be not much tonnage.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about incineration later, but I think probably better if I give other people an opportunity to ask some questions first.
Perfect. Would anyone else like to ask a question?
Yes, please, Chair.
Councillor Wynne?
Okay. I was letting David go on because I've done the same thing and I've got a lot of similar queries here. It's just go back for a moment. I also sit on the climate change group for Luton Council, so I have some concerns. Having read through this report, it went into a lot more detail than I was originally expecting, so thank you very much for that. It was very useful. There's a lot of stuff to do with incineration, which if I put my climate change hat on, all I can say is I'm grateful it's not here in Luton. Because it would appear to me that we have enormous issues to do with climate from the incineration process.
And I don't know how else we do it, but it doesn't look as if it's ongoing. It doesn't look as if it's environmentally acceptable. Have you got any views on that?
Only that energy from waste plants do put into the UK power grid about 10% of total capacity. So they are very much a factor in the energy generation makeup for the country. As far as their sustainability, from a climate change point of view, they are effectively a power generation plant. So they are subject to the same requirements as any power generation. From the waste and resources point of view, ideally, we as a country would be generating less waste. So therefore, there would be less waste to collect. So there would be less waste to dispose of. And that's the sustainable long-term view, where we get into that circular economy where we are not generating waste, or as little as possible, whatever type. And that includes recycling, because you've had to buy the product to recycle the packaging. So ideally, that whole ethos of that circular economy is what we should be aiming for, which is what the Climate Change Advisory Board effectively will be looking at over the years, how we move all products and all materials towards that sort of circular economy. So none of it has to be disposed of. It can all be reused and reworked and repurposed.
Thank you. Just thinking about that for a moment, I understand what you're saying. There was a proposal to put a large incinerator plant on the Lower Luton Road, which got rejected. It got rejected for all sorts of different reasons, not just pollution into the air, but also potential pollution into chalk stream as well. As I got involved in that at one stage. It still concerns me, and it seems to me, at least, that there's no real alternative that we have at the moment other than education of people to get out of the habit of generating so much waste, which is going to take a while. But there seems no alternative to me other than to progress more down towards the St Albans model, which puts a lot more obligation on individuals to do more work to sort and so on and make the whole recycling process easier. And I think that any concept of just trying to replicate what you've pictured here for us going forward isn't going to be a viable solution. And if you look at some of the countries overseas, particularly the Scandinavian countries, they've been pretty good at getting public acceptance to doing a lot more work towards recycling and being more environmentally friendly. Just as a starting point, I'd like to see us headed that way. One supplementary on that. You were talking earlier about Wigmore and the landfill at Wigmore. Yes, we do have issues to do with the methane from that, and we're looking forward to enormously increased issues to do with that. Even though they're now intending to dig up less of it, they're going to be digging up a whole load of it. So I'm expecting environmental and other issues to do with that as well.
Okay, great. Does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Bridgen.
Thank you, Chair. My question is just going back to the bottles and recycling of bottles. I understand that, as you mentioned, that they're screened and sorted in terms of colour and so on, and I believe that obviously the clear colourless bottles are easier to recycle than, for example, coloured opaque bottles. So, do the sort of coloured opaque bottles potentially are they more likely to end up in landfill, or are they processed in some other way? I'm just curious about that side of it.
At one time, there used to be separate collections in Luton and around the country for the different types. But as the glass industry has changed, the mixed glass with bottles and jars, and increasingly there's a lot of food waste jars, pasta and various sauces which are in glass jars. So that's why the glass reprocessors have sort of changed it. All of the glass that goes to them is made into small cullet, which is sort of 1 inch size, and then it goes for further use. Some go into road building. There's all sorts of end uses, and say in Luton, it's about 2,000 tons we collect and dispose of. So the market for reusing a bowl is as long as it remains whole. And currently, nobody's willing to pay us to put 12 wine bottles back into 12 slots.
And in relation, sorry, to plastic bottles, is it what's the process for plastic bottles that are perhaps more difficult to recycle? Again, my understanding is that the opaque coloured plastics are more difficult to recycle, possibly due to a greater level of impurities that may be introduced into the wider recycling pot, if you like.
Plastic bottles are really, irrespective of the colour, it's the actual product. So they're cleaned, the labels are taken off, and then again they're washed and made into a pellet, a fine flake, and then that's sorted usually by, it's called optical sorters, into the different colours and grades. So unlike glass, which in theory you can keep on using, plastics have a relatively short life. It's very similar to paper, sort of half a dozen times, and then they become not reusable. But the percentage of recycling in plastic bottles is crept up over the years, and the government, more specifically Treasury, brought in a tax coming from April the 1st, which is starting at 30% of recycled products. And as it's a tax, I suspect it'll soon be 40, 50. So that's went out all the manufacturers, and if they either put 30% minimum or they pay the tax. So.
Does anyone else have any more questions?
Just stopping for the moment. If I go back just for a moment, for my education, if we go back to section 19 in the report that you gave us, it's talking in there about residual contamination. Again, my perception of this is that represents a huge additional challenge to us, because certainly even down my street, which I think is relatively well behaved as in terms of its rubbish, there is clearly contamination going in recycling bins that's apparent to me just from looking around what happens in my own street, and I think we're relatively good. How do we tackle that issue, and how do we determine if the recycling lorry comes along tomorrow, and well, it will do on Thursday, hopefully Friday this week, but Thursday, if it comes along on Thursday and they take away all of the the recycling rubbish. How do we get rid of any contamination that's in that, rather than it destroying the whole load?
Okay, if I answer your query about section 19, which was the green waste, it's quite a small volume. It usually tends to be a plastic bottle or something somebody's put in the green waste bin, and 100 tons for a year, it's not a lot. It's, you know, as far as recycling goes, a lot of the recycling which is doesn't meet standard is either things like film from cucumbers and things like that, which there's no market, or it's recycling which, like a plastic bottle, which has liquid in it. So that's where the recycling is a problem, because what you don't want to do is send it away, as you say, spoil a load. But they actively sort and separate. So if a load comes in, there's some black bags in there, the loading shovel, the contractor will sort and scrape it out, and then we put it through the lines, and then it's put through again if there's any fines. If there's, so typically things like crisp packets don't always get picked because it's very much a labor intensive sorting. So if there's any what we call gross contamination, somebody's mistakenly put a nappy or something in there, that does go into the landfill or the residual waste bin, but that's picked off the line. So it's quite a intriguing process.
Just a supplementary, how does that affect our cost? Presumably, the operator is charging us a lot extra because of that.
It affects our cost in two ways. If there's a lot of black bag on, well, say nappy waste, that will have to go away for incineration or landfill. So there's a landfill tax. But also it means they have less of a product to sell, and therefore split the income and share with us. So simple as that. So, and you know, they're always focused on the market. So we've put in a link here to the Let's Recycle.com. The prices, they're the publicly available prices for materials. They go up and down like any commodity.
Going back into this time to section 12, to item 12. Earlier on in the report, there was 90,000 tonnes was one figure I saw, and this then says 49,000 tonnes. That doesn't seem to tie in with the percentages you were talking about earlier.
So this is where it goes into how the government look at things. There's 90,000 tonnes of municipal solid waste, so that includes everything that we collect. Whereas the household waste is so from the curbside is a lot less. So it's about 64,000 tonnes. So it's all the versions of what the government, how they work out recycling, how they work out some of their landfill targets. So everything is called municipal waste, but within that there's commercial waste, there's clinical waste, there's household waste. So there's various subgroups within that 90,000 tonnes.
Have you got a sort of simple picture we could look at which shows what the numbers are? Or have I got that already and I haven't seen it?
We can send you a straightforward sort of pie chart to show you what the split is.
Certainly be helpful to me. I don't know about the other people on this group, but certainly it would be helpful to me to understand.
Yeah, we'll get that sent out to
you. Councillor Young, you've got a question.
Just for my own knowledge, FFC Environment is our main agent, I notice.
Yes, that's correct.
We obviously have a contract to recycle the waste, sort it out and things like that. when we come to things like plastic and lead and things like that, do we get any money back from these things, or is it already everything goes to the contractor?
It's included in we pay a unitary rate, which includes for everything. So it includes the weighbridges, the personnel, the haulage, the disposal, everything. And so that's a blended rate. So some of the waste is quite expensive, like clinical is really expensive to dispose of. Some of it is at a lower rate. And so the income, we look at it 4 times a year, but that's all blended back into giving us a lower overall rate for all our materials, rather than us being subject to 1 good year and 5 bad years, so for recycling. So that's the current contract.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Do you have another question, Councillor Franks?
Yeah, I've got a couple of suggestions to make. But first of all, on incineration, it has traditionally been the dirty boy in waste management, and we've been led over the last few years to believe that there have been significant environmental improvements in the way it's dealt with. Reading through the synopsis of expert presentations, it's probably one of the most depressing documents I've read in a very long time. And I think we do need, particularly since 80% of the council's residual waste appears to be ending up in incineration, and that's a huge amount of waste. I think we do need to know a great deal more about incineration. The contractor uses 2 incinerators at least going to the schedule, at least one of which actually is part of the group. So it shouldn't be too difficult to get at least one of the operators, or both of them, to come along and explain to us why incineration is actually environmentally and economically better than many of the alternatives like landfill. I'm sure they'll be able to do that. But sorry, before I finish, Sean, we will also need, of course, to hear the counter argument. And I don't know where on earth we go to get that, but maybe local Friends of the Earth may have a contact that would be willing to suggest someone who could come along and give us 15 or 20 minutes on the counter argument. I think both of those would be quite important for us.
Chair, perhaps this would be an appropriate time to suggest a visit to one of the energy from waste plants, if members are happy to do it. I'm going to arrange for a visit to the Great Moor one, which is probably the closest in Buckinghamshire. It's owned by Buckinghamshire County Council, operated by FCC. And then we do a tour of the plant, but then you can see the analytical equipment for the flumes and see all the products and ask all the questions, really.
I think that would be useful, but it's not instead of the presentations by both sides. I think we need to understand the arguments. So yeah, I'm sure a visit would be very interesting. Going on to these grids again on pages 12, 13 and 14. There are, I think, some issues that we could do with some more information on. Taking the plastic bottles forwarded for plastics recycling. I really think we need to know more about that, about who's recycling them, where they're going, what are they doing with the material, is all of it dealt with in the UK, or is there any export? There are quite a lot of questions there. on the mixed glass, it seems to me that here there is a need for some external expertise from the advocates of glass recycling as opposed to the advocates of glass container reuse. There must be some benefits to one side or the other. In fact, there are probably arguments on both sides, a bit like the incineration argument. It would be helpful to know from those who advocate recycling and those who advocate reuse exactly what they think the advantages both economically and environmentally are. And when we get to batteries, auto and household, I accept the argument that there isn't a huge amount of plastic in domestic batteries, but of course there is in motor batteries. And a bit more information on sent for final disposal, I think would help us. Where are we going? I've got two more, I think. Oh yes, the final two on the grid, engine oil and cooking oil. There is a company operating locally which collects used cooking oil from hot food takeaways, and they claim that they clean it and then sell it for reuse as cooking oil. Now, whether that really is the case or whether it's another one of these urban myths that are spread around, I don't know. But it would be good to understand what kind of oil is produced as a result of the processing of both engine oil and cooking oil. I'm sure they don't recycle engine oil for cooking. But yeah, a bit more information on what kind of oil is produced and what it's used for, I think would be quite helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. Have you got any comments on that, Sean?
Yes, we can get all that information. The only one I may struggle with would be an advocate for the reuse of large volumes of glass bottles. Local facilities, local ones where there's a small amount, but as I say, we collect about 2,000 tons, which is not large. So but we'll ask the manufacturer, and we'll ask around. We'll ask some of the trade industry professionals if they've come across it, and if anybody wants to can supply us with information to advocate it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sean. Just a couple of quick points then. First of all, I know I've been around a long time, but when I was a kid, all drinks used to come in glass bottles. They were all charged with twopence or threepence returnable deposit. The food manufacturers collected, sterilised and reused. And I promise you, you never, ever saw broken glass on the streets, because the kids like me used to go and collect up these things and take them back to get the deposit back. It was a nice supplement to your pocket money. So yeah, that may just have been a fringe benefit, but it was a benefit nevertheless. And at this early stage in our deliberations, I'm beginning to form a feeling that a significant amount of what we may end up saying, and this is speculation, of course, we're early days, will be trying to put pressure on higher powers than Luton Borough Council to do something about the production of waste and packaging. When I was a kid, we had a dustbin which was half the size of one of our wheelie bins. I was in a family of mum and dad and 3 kids, and all of our waste went into that half-size bin, all of it, and mostly it wasn't even full. So clearly there has been a revolution by manufacturers in producing packaging. It irritates me every time I buy a tube of toothpaste to find that it's wrapped up 3 times, and that doesn't even include the packaging that it's in when it gets delivered to the supermarket. Completely unnecessary. And I got involved a while ago, years ago, in a campaign to leave unnecessary packaging at supermarket checkouts, and the supermarkets got damn fed up with it, I can tell you, because they then had to deal with it. It may be time to restart that sort of campaign, but inevitably, I think we're probably going to come up with recommendations that the council puts pressure on other higher bodies to deal with the strategic issues that unfortunately the council can't. Hopefully, we will also come up with some useful pointers for the council's new waste contract. And that's really what we're here for, isn't it?
Great. So it sounds like the next meeting we want to have sort of an environment-based report covering a few different things. Yeah, I've got some notes. Perfect. Councillor Wynne?
I would like to go back to the comments that you made in here about, for example, St Albans, with the different approach to dealing with waste. I personally would like to hear a lot more about how that's working and whether comparatively that's costing a lot more money than we pay on the waste, and just effectively trying to say, well, we've got our approach to the world and they've got their approach to the world. I'd like to compare the 2 worlds, and if we could do that, that I think would help me. Just as a little aside, going back to David and his glass bottles for a moment, I very consciously used a delivery of milk and orange juice and stuff by a proper milkman with reusable bottles. But that frankly is a luxury because it's hugely more expensive than buying the same products in the supermarket.
Could I comment on that before Sean responds? I understand exactly why the question is being asked, and I could quite agree. We really could do with a lot more information about the St Albans system. In particular, it would be good to understand shifting the responsibility, as St Albans Council has, onto the individual householders. It'd be interesting to understand whether that has an effect on the amount of recycling that people actually do, because clearly we wouldn't want to reduce the recycling that's going on. And the other difference we need to bear in mind, of course, is that St Albans collects the waste, but it doesn't dispose of it. The disposal is the responsibility of Hertfordshire County Council. So there is a slight difference. It might be better to understand as well that relationship and how much of the separation of collections is from pressure from Hertfordshire County Council. What is the relationship there? Are they in agreement on it?
Chair, if I could just answer, I live in St Albans, so I have 3 wheelie bins, 3 boxes, and food waste, and I live in a terraced house. So they have what's called source separated. They still send it to the same sort of companies as the commingle do. But I know over the Christmas period, there was so much cardboard in what relatively a small box. It was all wet and soaking. So it's a very different demographic. Very few flats, high-rise flats, and fairly affluent. There are two tiers, so they're a collection authority. So as Councillor Frank said, the county council has to arrange for all of the recycling, all of the disposal. That's it's currently under discussion because part of the Environment Act, as it is going to change how that relationship operates, because things like recycling credits, where the counties used to pay the districts to collect the recycling, and that was a significant sum which paid for the collections, that's disappearing. So there's a lot more focus on them working together, and if most counties will have 3 or 4 different systems, because each district has their own different system. So we do commingled, which probably 60%, 70% of the England does at the moment. Wales and Scotland are very different. They've chosen at a national level to put funding into all of the materials getting source separated and the processing facilities. So that is very much a national decision, as Wales and Scotland have taken. So yeah, but don't underestimate the 2-tier and the demographics. It's not always the harmonious relationship that might be presented in the partnerships.
I do understand that. Just picking up on one of the points you just said there, Sean, very helpful response. But I've seen nationally there have been all sorts of issues to do with, you said about a lot more flats and so on. There have been a lot of issues nationally about the difficulty that flat owners have got to even have communal recycling bins in the flats. Just out of interest, how well are we organised doing that with flats here in Luton? Because I don't know.
We could do better. There's 14 to 1,500 blocks of flats of various sizes. And one of the biggest problems is ensuring that whatever the planners say, if it's a new block, that there's enough capacity in that, and that's maintained, rather than just becomes another car parking spot 3 or 4 years down the line, which is quite often a thing. Retrofitting some of the older buildings and ensuring that all the tenants or all the residents take part, because it really only needs a small number of residents, even in a small block, to put the wrong things in the recycling for it to become an issue. And it might be a bit unfair, but it's hard to get a sense of ownership for things like the waste, for keeping things. So that's where a lot of the time and effort of crews, officers across the country are spent to deal with flats. It's an ever-changing and quite challenging area to work in, with Luton especially heading to close to 25% flats now. It's getting more like a London borough in that aspect, with the amount of flats across the town.
So would it be useful to have a report that sort of goes into different models?
We could refresh the model that we had for fortnightly collections, the decisions just beforehand, which highlighted some of the models and options, and send that around to members. But with the changes in legislation, the next 3 or 4 years, it's going to be some pressure from government, as Councillor Franks said, but also pressure to government if packaging especially is not handled and and paid for by the producers. And that's where the key thrust of people like the LGA, the DEP, NORDA, the various trade organisations and council bodies have been pushing government to say the producers, mail order companies should pay for that market, should pay for that product to be reused and recycled. So it doesn't all. We are at the end of a long supply chain. Councils, the statutory duty is on very few people in that chain, other than councils at the end.
It sounds like it might be helpful if you could recirculate it. Perfect. Thank you. Do we have any more comments on the report?
Can I just put more in?
Go on.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to go back to this business of incineration and sort of saying I have become, reading this report, very sceptical about it. 20 years ago, we were being told it was the be-all, end-all, the answer for everything. Reading this report, it's becoming increasingly iffy. What's coming out of the flues and the toxicity of it is quite alarming. And so, yes, I'm very interested in hearing more about incineration. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nicola.
Thanks, Chair. I just wondered, just to be helpful going into the next meeting, can we just confirm, I think, areas of focus, which I think incineration, absolutely. I think the big topic. I think there's an offer of a trip to the site that FCC run in Buckinghamshire. There is the counter argument, so that we can wrap that up in that report. And then there's I think further exploration around glass, plastics, batteries and oil. There's been a number of questions, and I just wonder if we can wrap that up into a report as well. A couple, I think probably two core reports and a visit in the first instance.
That is exactly what I had written down.
as well as the last point that you raised around collection systems, and that could possibly be an information brief that we circulate in between meetings, because we've got that information, so members can have a look at that, and then if more is required, we can do some more work on that.
Councillor Franks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nicola. I think that really is very helpful. As far as the incineration issue is concerned, I'm quite keen that we actually have a presentation from the incinerator operators and from an opponent. I don't know whether it is going to be Friends of the Earth, but we're sure we can find someone. It would be good if we could have that so that we have an opportunity to ask questions. If they don't want to actually appear in person in the council chamber, I'm sure we could arrange for them to attend virtually and take questions if necessary. But I do think it's important, rather than just a report. Yeah, report, sure, no problem. But it'd be good to have the witnesses, if you like, particularly if they are not council staff.
Chair, can I suggest that if we proceed down the lines that Councillor Franks has just said, we have an employee within the council who is an expert on air pollution and is working closely with the airport and the climate change group. Can I suggest that we try and co-opt him into our meeting, not to be a permanent member, but just to help us with any understanding that might come out of the pollution issue? Would seem to make sense to use our own expert.
Specifically in relation to incineration.
Chair, that's Andrew loosely. So absolutely, we could. It probably would be more appropriate to do that rather than bring a pressure group in to have have a big debate at this point, given
That sounds appropriate.
given we
yes.
are looking at the future contract. So I think that's a good suggestion, Councillor Wynne.
Yes.
He seems to have a very sound understanding of the issues. And
does.
as we've got an expert on tap, I think we ought to use him.
That sounds very appropriate. Right. Should we move on to the recommendations? All right. The recommendations are that the Task and Finish group will review the information supplied in the report and provide feedback around the current waste and recycling material flows. I think we have sufficiently done that. And then that the Task and Finish group consider whether there are other material flows that should be investigated as possible options for future materials and processes. Does anyone have any comments on that specifically?
No, Joe, I think we've pretty much covered the essential items for the next meeting, which was summed up quite nicely by Nicola.
Perfect.
I think that's where we need to go. And this perhaps is the right time to say thank you to you, Chair, and to the officers for getting us off to what I think has been a really quite useful start to this process.
Yes, thank you. It's very informative. Well, should we move on to dates of future meetings? So I've got here the 9th of March and the 19th of April. We're happy to agree with those dates. Ninth of March and 19th of April. Would it be possible to get those for the 9th of March? The reports discussed.
I think we were just contemplating whether it would be useful to do the visit and then have the kind of the formal reports and debate from both sides on incineration, so you get to see it first. And so if we could do that in March, I think that would be good, and that will give Andrew a bit of time, because obviously this will be new for him to come on and do that additional work. It gives him a bit of a lead in. So if we can do it that way round, I think that would be preferable. I'll ask Sean and Steve whether the kind of the further information, because I don't know how much is available on the glass, the batteries, the oil, so that further information, and the plastics, whether that could be wrapped up in a report in March, or whether we need to shift that, because some of this is about kind of workload issues as well. We want to keep the momentum up, but equally, I think incineration is the hot topic, isn't it? Excuse the pun. That we need to kind of focus on and get that booked in if we've got a visit to do first. Does that sound possible? Does that sound use the March meeting as a visit, the April meeting to kind of do the debate, or the both sides, and then if we can do the other information either at the March, we'll let you know. If not, we'll move to the April.
Okay. Would members be happy with that?
Yes, I think so. I don't know how you're planning to do the site visit, but if you're planning a daytime visit, there obviously are members here who have full-time employment, and that's going to make it difficult for them. But on the other hand, you can only do what you can do, can't you?
It would be a daytime visit, because, to be honest, the EFW is a bit like a ghost ship in the evening. There's two people, but yeah. What we'll try and do is, depending on numbers, we'll organise a minibus, so that's a bit easier. So we can have conversations on the way about the various issues, and so hopefully address some of your queries, and possibly see with that somebody like Andrew can come along as well.
Excellent. So I think that wraps up the business. I think that wraps up everything for the meeting. Thank you all for coming. That's it. And thank you, Nicola, Sean, etc.